Allegheny Middle School and Alderdice High School.
I don't know who did this, but whoever did this, let me tell you something. God gonna have his way with you because there was no reason for this to happen today.
Today we're talking about the case of John James Hornezes Jr. But to understand what happened here, we have to go back 13 days earlier. Before we get into what happened at that church, I want you to understand who John James Hornezes Jr. actually was. Because depending on which corner of the internet you've already seen this story on, you've probably heard two completely different versions of this young man. And honestly, both of them are missing something. John was 20 years old, born January 7th, 2002, right here in Pittsburgh, to John Hornezes Sr. and to Mika Hornezes. Basketball wasn't just something he did by every account from the people who actually knew him. It was something that shaped him. He came up through the Pittsburgh Project, through Urban Impact, through Allegheny Elementary, Allegheny Middle, and Alderdice High School, where he graduated in 2020. Before basketball, though, there was football. John started playing at just 5 years old with a local team called the North Shore Stallions. And according to his own family, he stayed loyal to that one program his entire childhood, even as other community teams tried to recruit him away. After high school, John didn't stop moving forward. He pursued technical training, HVAC, heating and cooling systems through Alderdice and the Community College of Allegheny County. And then he set his sights on something bigger. He enrolled at All-State Career School, working toward his commercial driver's license, trying to build a real trade. 8 months before he died, John became a father. People close to him say fatherhood changed something in him, that he was trying to build stability, not just for himself, but for the family that now depended on him. His mother, Tamika, worked as a nurse, and according to letters read at his own funeral, she spent years caring for children throughout the North Side, doing their physicals, showing up for youth programs, working full days and still making time for kids who weren't even hers. One letter from his home church described how so many children on the North Side grew up simply calling her their nurse. John's friends remembered him by name at his service, Kevin, Ron, and Nico among them. And his sister, Uriah, sat with the rest of the family as letter after letter came in from his home church, from his grandfather's church, from his youth coaches, all describing a young man who was, by every account of the people who loved him, deeply rooted in that community. Now here's the part that gets complicated. Police allegedly believe John had some level of connection to a local group involved in an ongoing conflict on the North Side, specifically a rivalry between two neighborhood groups, the Brighton Place Crips and a group known as the Commons. His family has pushed back hard against that characterization and that tension between who his family says he was and what police allege he was involved in is something we're not going to resolve for you in this video. We're going to lay out what's actually documented and let you sit with it the way his own community has had to. Now let's talk about October 15th, 2022. Because everything that happened at that church 13 days later, it starts here at a gas station on a Saturday night that started out completely ordinary. It was just after 9:30 at night. John was at the Sunoco on Cedar Avenue with two of his associates. Reportedly, tension had been building between his group and a rival group connected to the Crips for some time before that night. The kind of tension that, in that neighborhood, everybody around it could feel coming, even if nobody could say exactly when it would boil over. That intersection, Cedar Avenue and Presley Street, sat at what police would later describe as the largest open-air drug market in the city, which meant it was already a place where rival groups crossed paths more often than either side probably wanted. At 9:36, a black Hyundai Tucson pulled into that gas station. Inside were two men, 19-year-old Sharon Troutman and 30-year-old Samuel Pagese. And according to police, Troutman showed what looked like a gun toward a man named J. Lone Hines, who was standing nearby with John. Hines reportedly backed away toward Allegheny Commons Park across the street, and that's when a second vehicle pulled up behind the Tucson carrying more of Hines' associates. Now here's where the story gets genuinely disputed, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise because the people who investigated this case couldn't even fully agree on it. Police allege that gunfire broke out almost simultaneously between both sides. Attorneys for Troutman and Pagese have argued their clients did not fire first, that surveillance footage shows a flash from another direction entirely, from a separate shooter in the park across the street, and that their clients only returned fire after that. What we know for certain from the physical evidence is this. In the span of about 11 seconds, at least 27 shots were fired on that street, and standing at a bus stop less than a block away were two women who had absolutely nothing to do with any of it. Her name was Betty Jean Everett, 59 years old. She lived in a high-rise right there on the north side, had lived there for 5 years. That bus stop wasn't some random spot she happened to be standing at, it was her routine. Her family later said it plainly, she wasn't just standing at the bus stop. That was a place that she lived for 5 years. She was a resident in the area of the north side. 5 years of catching that same bus. 5 years of a routine that had absolutely nothing to do with anyone's rivalry, anyone's beef, anyone's war. And then there was Jacqueline Mahalik, 33 years old. That night she'd had dinner with friends at the waterfront and she was walking to catch a bus for her late shift at work. Nothing more complicated than that. A woman finishing dinner heading to her job.
There isn't anything that meant more in the world to her than her family, her kids. When she would walk into a room, the room would light up with her smile. She was beautiful. She had a personality. She had a wonderful sense of humor. She was very athletic.
Bridget Mihalik is still stunned that her daughter Jacqueline is really gone.
This just doesn't feel real right now. It just terrifies me to think that she's not going to be in my world for the rest of my life and her children's lives. That terrifies me. Because she was my best friend.
Mahalik says her daughter grew up in Indiana County. She recently moved back to Pittsburgh in the summer. She was engaged, living in Shadyside and working at a manufacturing company. On the night of the shooting, she was supposed to work at 11. She had dinner with friends before work, but never made it. She got the horrible news from her daughter's friend.
She told me that she was told Jacqueline had been shot. She just was an amazing person. She would give the shirt off of her back. She would give somebody her last dollar. She would give somebody her last morsel of food. She cared about people. She loved people.
Neither of these women knew John Hornezes. Neither of them knew Sharon Troutman or Samuel Pagese or J. Lone Hines. They were simply standing in the wrong place at the wrong moment when a dispute between two groups of young men turned into gunfire. As the SUV turned onto Presley Street and later as it pulled through a nearby parking lot, more shots followed. And that's when Betty and Jacqueline were caught in the crossfire. Within minutes, multiple calls flooded 911. First responders arrived to find several people down. CPR was started on scene. Trauma teams worked at Allegheny General Hospital just 1 block away. When the shooting stopped, 3 people were dead. John Hornezes, Betty Everett, Jacqueline Mahalik. All 3 pronounced within roughly 30 minutes of each other at that same hospital. And here's a detail that took the investigation in a direction almost nobody expected. Police determined that John wasn't killed by the men in that SUV at all. He was struck by return fire from someone on his own side of the conflict. A 4th person survived that night. J. Lone Hines was shot in the leg, and he lived. He would later be charged in connection with the deaths of Betty and Jacqueline, the 2 women killed at that bus stop. Investigators moved fast. Pittsburgh's major crimes unit pulled footage from every angle they could find. Gas station cameras, nearby business security systems, traffic cameras at the intersection. Within days, they identified the black Hyundai Tucson and traced it to Samuel Pagese. On October 17th, J. Lone Hines was arrested, still recovering from his leg wound, and charged with 2 counts of criminal homicide for Betty and Jacqueline's deaths. The next day, U.S. Marshals located Sharon Troutman, and on November 4th, nearly 3 weeks later, Samuel Pages was taken into custody by Pittsburgh's Fugitive Apprehension Unit and the U.S. Marshals Service. Troutman was initially charged with homicide in John's death, but in January of 2023, prosecutors withdrew that charge. The reason was, in the autopsy itself, the trajectory of the bullets that killed John didn't match where Troutman had been standing. The bullets had entered from behind him, not in front of him. Let that sit for a second. The man originally charged with killing John Hornezes couldn't have fired the shot that killed him. Homicide charges against Pages were dropped that same day for the same reason. To this day, no one has ever been convicted of causing John's death. The morning after the shooting, Pittsburgh's mayor stood at the corner of Cedar and Stockton, not far from where the blood was still visible on the concrete. I couldn't imagine what that feels like. We need the entire city to come together to deal with this violence. But in certain corners of that same neighborhood, a very different kind of conversation was already happening. Because in Pittsburgh's North Side, in October of 2022, a killing like this one didn't always end with an arrest. Sometimes, allegedly, it ended with a response. On October 27th, 12 days after the Cedar Avenue shooting and one day before John's funeral, police say there was a retaliatory shooting in the nearby Spring Hill neighborhood. One they believed was directly connected to everything that had just happened. The violence hadn't stopped, it had just moved. And on October 26, John's family made a decision that, in hindsight, tells you exactly how afraid they already were. They formally requested police protection for John's funeral. They knew the streets weren't finished. They asked for help before anyone had to ask them why they needed it. Pittsburgh's Public Safety Department approved that request. 2 officers were assigned. Remember that. October 28, 2022. Just before noon, over 100 people filled the pews at Destiny of Faith Church on Brighton Road. A horse-drawn carriage carried John's casket. Gospel music played. Reverend Dr. Brenda Gregg led the service in a sanctuary she'd pastored for more than 30 years. Family and friends read letters that had come in from across the community from John's grandfather's church, from his youth coaches, from his home congregation. His obituary was read aloud, tracing his life from his birth in Pittsburgh, through football and basketball, through his pursuit of a trade, right up to the son he left behind. And across the street for somewhere between 20 and 30 minutes before anything happened, 2 people stood watching. Prosecutors would later identify them as 19-year-old Sean Davis and 16-year-old Hezekiah Nixon. Surveillance footage showed one of them holding a handgun in plain sight. The other had something hidden under his clothing. Nobody outside stopped them. Nobody inside knew they were there. According to the Allegheny County District Attorney's Office, 23 shots were fired outside that church. One victim was struck 13 times. Prosecutors say one of the 2 gunmen chased a wounded man while continuing to fire. In the chaos, one of the horses pulling John's casket was also struck. Inside, people dropped to the floor. Parents covered their children. One man reportedly climbed over John's own casket, trying to reach the altar and get away from the gunfire. A church trustee standing in the vestibule later said that a young woman he didn't know pushed him out of the way, and he fell to the ground, and he believes that's the reason he wasn't hit. He never learned her name. 5 people were shot. A 6th was injured trying to escape. The 5 taken to Allegheny General ranged from 20 to 66 years old, a reminder that this wasn't just young men caught in a targeted attack. It was a grandmother, a grown woman, and men in their 20s and 60s, all of whom had simply come to grieve. Every one of them survived. At least 6 people are injured after a shooting at a funeral outside of a church on Pittsburgh's North Side. Police say that funeral was for the victim of a recent homicide. Law enforcement officials are still investigating the motive of today's shooting.
At least 6 people are injured after a shooting at a funeral outside of a church on Pittsburgh's North Side. Police say that funeral was for the victim of a recent homicide. Law enforcement officials are still investigating the motive of today's shooting, but do say there was likely more than one gunman.
There were 4 victims that were self-transported to AGH. There were also 1 additional victim that was critical that was transported by medics. Subsequently, there was a 6th victim that had left the scene that was then transported by medics shortly thereafter.
A funeral, that's God's house. Nothing is sacred that you would come in here and blast it up or shoot outside. This makes no sense.
People saying their final goodbyes raise concerns about men in ski masks coming and going towards the start of the service, and chatter about something about to go down. The church's director says training from Pittsburgh police on active shooter situations was put to test, and it worked. Learned how to secure the building, which we did when it happened. We secured so nobody would go out the front, and our trustees. We did everything right. There's nothing else we could have done. Maybe it's just a travesty outside. A hearse was surrounded by police tape, evidence marker sitting in the exact spot where dozens of rounds were fired.
This isn't the way. This isn't the way. This is out of hand, and it's constantly going on.
Later that same day, detectives traced Sean Davis's vehicle to an address in McKees Rocks. Surveillance was set up, and about 40 minutes later, Davis and Nixon returned to the car and drove off. Detectives conducted a traffic stop on the McKees Rocks Bridge. Both men got out and ran. Nixon threw a black handgun into the river below, recovered 2 days later by Pittsburgh river rescue divers, and matched by ballistics to casings from the shooting scene. Davis dropped a second weapon on the roadway. When detectives searched the apartment the two had left, they found gloves and a black face mask matching the surveillance footage, along with a black puffy jacket and sneakers that police said Davis had been wearing. Investigators even matched the distinctive waistband pattern of the underwear Davis was wearing at the time of his arrest to what was visible on one of the shooters in the church footage. Gunshot residue was found on gloves recovered from the apartment and on the clothing both men were wearing when they were caught. At the preliminary hearing, prosecutors laid out that evidence in full. The defense argued that no one's face was ever shown on camera and that the case rested entirely on circumstantial details. Clothing, shoes, underwear. The judge disagreed and the case was sent to trial. Here's where all of these cases ultimately landed. Sharon Troutman pleaded guilty in June of 2025 to aggravated assault, conspiracy, and firearms charges. He's currently serving a sentence of at least 8 years. J. Lone Hines went to trial in January of 2026, charged with killing Betty Averitt and Jacqueline Mahalik. His attorney argued self-defense. After a 2-week trial, a jury deliberated for roughly 3 hours and acquitted him on every homicide charge. He was convicted only on firearms charges and sentenced in April of 2026 to 12.5 to 25 years. Hezekiah Nixon pleaded guilty in the September of 2025 to aggravated assault and conspiracy charges connected to the funeral shooting. He was sentenced to 11 to 22 years, a sentence handed down the same day as a separate case involving another shooting death he was also connected to. Sean Davis's case, as of the most recent reporting available, is still ongoing. And Samuel Pagese, the third man originally charged in connection with John's death, doesn't appear in any public reporting after his early charges were addressed. What ultimately happened in his case simply isn't part of the public record we could find. Sit with that for a moment. 3 people were killed on Cedar Avenue. 3 men were originally charged with homicide in connection with those deaths. Not one of them has ever been convicted of killing anyone. Today at the corner where Betty and Jacqueline died, there's still a memorial. Neighbors keep candles lit there. Betty's daughter has said her mother's ashes stay on her mantle now and that she no longer feels comfortable letting her own children ride the bus alone. Jacqueline's mother now raises her 4 children, the youngest of them barely a year old when their mother died. According to reporting on the case, these 2 women, strangers before any of this happened, sat together through years of hearings and became each other's support through all of it. 2 women waiting on a bus, a young father trying to build something better for his son, and a community that still doesn't have a full answer for why the people assigned to protect a grieving family's final goodbye were nowhere to be found. I want to ask you something because I think it matters. What does it say about where we are when a family has to formally request protection just to bury their own child in peace? And what does it say when that request approved on paper still wasn't enough to keep them safe? This isn't a story with a clean ending. It's not supposed to be. Betty Averitt and Jacqueline Mahalik did nothing wrong. John Hornezes is still, in the eyes of the law, a man nobody was ever convicted of killing. And a police department still hasn't fully explained, even years later, how 2 officers assigned to guard a church ended up nowhere near it when it mattered most. Maybe the lesson here isn't about gangs or turf or retaliation. Maybe it's about how quickly a promise approved, on record, in writing, can still fail the people who trusted it the most. And maybe it's about remembering that behind every one of these names, there was a whole life that had nothing to do with how it ended. This is Bare Intel. I'll see you in the next one.